Welcome back to another Sliders video here on the channel. You know the drill by now. EA have dropped another update, two updates actually, and have completely ruined our gameplay experience on FC24. So it's up to us to manipulate the game through the sliders back into a playable state. Now, there are two glaring problems with the gameplay post updates. Firstly, there's very little attacking variety from the CPU. They tend to dribble or pass the ball into this little channel just outside the 6-yard box, and that seems to be the only place they seem to be willing to create chances on goal. So you'll see very few crosses, shots from outside the area, through balls slipped through the back line, and those kinds of things. You'll see them from time to time, but they're just not there with anywhere near the frequency that we would like. The other issue is that the tackle button just sometimes doesn't work. It just barely registers that you've made a tackle. The tackle that you make is just inexplicably ineffective. Unfortunately, these just aren't things that you can address with the sliders. They are issues that are just baked into the code of the game. The tackling you can address to some degree with the first touch control error slider, but again, only to some degree. However, if you're able to put those things aside and overlook them, this actually may be the most realistic the game has been all year with this slider update. When the CPU enters your final third, the game kind of falls apart, but up until that point, the game plays excellently. The build-up, the possession play is fantastic. There's really dynamic battles for possession in midfield. The turnovers in possession are frequent and realistic. And the game tends to go through phases where you dominate the ball for a while, then the CPU gets its chance to enjoy possession for a little longer. And the game will be open and expansive at times, a bit more end-to-end, and then at others, it will really narrow down and it will be much more possession-based, slow build-up where you really have to pick your passes, where you really have to try and unlock the door of the defense. So if you've seen my slider videos before, you will know these things already, but if this is the first of these videos that you have seen, there are a couple of important settings that we need to address before we get into the actual sliders themselves. Firstly, these sets are designed for use on 10-minute halves and on legendary difficulty, also on default game speed. Default game speed isn't really negotiable, but 10-minute halves and legendary difficulty are. You just may need to tweak some of the values slightly if you do want to bring the half length down, or if you do want to bring the difficulty down. The other thing to note is that this main set is designed for use with manual controls. So things like shot assistance, through pass assistance, lobbed pass, ground passes, all of these should be set to manual. I tend to have crossing set to semi just because manual isn't the greatest this year, but all of these should be set to manual rather than assisted for this particular set. However, like usual, I will have a harder set and an assisted set for those of you who like a bit more of a challenge and for those of you who do like to use the assists. So in terms of the user sliders, for the first time this year, we have made some slight changes to the movement value. So sprint speed should come down to 2, acceleration is bumped up to 51. The game just feels a little bit faster, so that's why we've moved the sprint speed down. The animations needed a little bit of smoothing out though, so I have bumped acceleration up to 51, which helps to achieve that. Shot error should be at 50, but pass error has come down even further from the last update, all the way down to 5. Remember, this is designed for use with manual controls, so you will be implementing plenty of errors yourselves with inaccurate inputs, but you do want the ball to actually go where you are pointing the left stick the majority of the time. The assisted set will have much higher shot and pass errors than these. Shot speed we've got at 45, pass speed we've got at 42. Injury frequency and severity can remain the same. These remain the best values that I've managed to find this year. Goalkeeper ability is currently at 60. Marking we've got at 51. Run frequency is another big change in this particular set. This has been bumped all the way up to 35. And this is very much linked to the line values, which have also changed fairly significantly. Line height is currently at 68. Line length is at 28. And line width is at 50. So with the line values at these particular iterations, it was slightly too difficult to play through the midfield. So we've bumped the run frequency up significantly to help with that. With these particular values, I was creating single-digit chances, single-digit shots on goal too often. The run frequency helps you create a few more opportunities. and prevents you from just having a possession-based team sat back, a team sat in the low block, just kind of facing off against each other in a stalemate. Your players will break through the lines a little bit more often now. Fullback positioning is still set at 20. I've bumped the power bar up ever so slightly from 62 to 64. I just found I wasn't quite getting passes off quickly enough at 62, which was meaning that I was losing the ball a little bit more often in midfield. So at 64, it's entirely personal preference, this particular value, but at 64 you can just get those passes off a little bit quicker, play those one-touch tiki-taka type style of passes in midfield. First touch control error is all the way down at 1. This is something that will ameliorate to some extent that lack of effectiveness of the tackle buttons currently. It will make your stand tackles a little bit more successful. It will mean that you end up with lucky deflections and second balls a little bit more often as well. As for the CPU, we've got a number of similar or identical values to the user, but some will be slightly different. The movement sliders are the same, so you want sprint speed at 2, acceleration at 51, shot error is at 52, pass error at 48, shot speed and pass speed are significantly different from the user. Those should be at 34 each. The same injury frequency and severity, 85 and 12. Goalkeeper ability is going to be different as well. That's much lower at 46. Marking is the same at 51. A slight difference in run frequency, and we've actually given the user the advantage this time. Ordinarily, I have the user value 5 lower than the CPU, but I've actually got them reversed this time. So the CPU value should be at 30. Line height, length, and width should remain the same at 68, 28, and 50. Fullback positioning, as always, for the CPU is at 50. And then first touch control error is at 100. So again, that huge disparity between the first touch control errors, 1 for the user, 100 for the CPU, is going to help to balance things a little bit in terms of the tackles, the second balls, the lucky bounces, and that kind of thing. You can, to some extent, use the first touch control error value as a way to kind of refine the difficulty of the game. So if you're finding it too easy with the current values, lower the first touch control error for the CPU slightly, raise the user first touch control error slightly, and that should make the game a little bit more difficult. If you're finding it way too easy, maybe reverse them, 100 for the user, 1 for the CPU. You can kind of use this particular slider in that way. So here is the standard version of the set in full. As I said, I'm really enjoying the build-up play. I'm really enjoying the approach, the midfield, the turnovers in possession with this particular set. I've had some really back and forth games. I've had some really nice one-touch passing moves. I've had players taking up positions and making runs that you wouldn't ordinarily see. And I do my best on a game-to-game basis to look over the ineffectual tackling and the lack of CPU variety in attack, because if it wasn't for those two things, I think the game would be in such a fantastic place right now. Now, I play a lot of FC 24, but I am by no means an expert at the game. Many of you watching will be much better than I am, so for those of you who need a bit more of a challenge, here is a slightly harder version of the set that you can try. As I mentioned, you can use the first touch control error value to kind of refine the difficulty slightly. So that's something we have done in this harder set, balancing the values out at 50 apiece for the user and the CPU. One of the primary ways you can make the game more difficult is to increase the shot and the pass speed for the CPU. So those are both being bumped up to 38. Whereas the error values have been lowered for the CPU to 50 and 45 respectively. Another way to make the game significantly more difficult is to raise the marking, so those have been raised to 55 for both the user and the CPU. You do need to be a little bit careful with this slider, because raising the marking too high will drag players out of position and will open up holes that you really don't want to be opening up. That will make the game easier. So it's all about finding the balance with the marking, but 55 should be a good value. Another way you can increase the difficulty is by increasing the run frequency for the CPU. Again, they'll be breaking the lines more often. They'll be creating more opportunities that you're forced to defend. And then finally, goalkeeper ability for the CPU gets a slight bump up to 48 as well. So each of those two sets, the standard and the harder, should be used with manual controls. But if you don't like to use manual and you do prefer to stick with assisted, this next set is the one for you. So in this set, very little needs to change for the CPU, since it is primarily the user that will be impacted by the change from manual to assisted. But your shots will likely be a bit more accurate. So I have raised the goalkeeper ability from 46 to 48 for the assisted set. There's very little that you need to change on the user side as well. Obviously, the error sliders will be the main thing. So shot error goes from 50 up to 75. Pass error goes from 5 up to 62. Because the CPU will be assisting you in terms of where the ball ends up, you're no longer going to be making those errors yourself. So we do need the sliders to implement those errors for you. I have also brought the shot and pass speed down to 42 and 40 respectively. So again, your passes, your shots are going to be more accurate because they are assisted by the CPU. So you don't need to take as much time. You don't need to put as much thought into each individual action. And the CPU won't have as good a chance of intercepting balls that you will be playing now. So you need to lower the speeds on those values a little bit to make up for that. And then I've also lowered the power bar slightly. Again, for similar reasons, you're not going to be taking as much time trying to ensure that your pass goes in the right place because you're going to have the CPU assist for that. So you probably don't need that extra little bump to the speed of the power bar. There you have it, version 6 of my realistic sliders for FC24. As always, I'll put the full sets down in the description. And make sure you let me know in the comments what you think of the current set. These will be the sliders that I'm using in each of my gameplay series at the moment. So that's the Euro 2024 series with England and the realistic MLS career mode series with New England Revolution. So make sure you check those episodes out if you haven't already. I hope to see you in one of them soon. Take it easy.